In a previous video, we looked at the idea of subjective utility, and in particular, we looked at the idea of, Bernoulli's idea that when you give someone some money, this will increase their happiness, but the amount of increase in happiness or utility that they get will diminish the richer they are. So this was known as diminishing marginal returns. And we saw a particular curve that was traced out by a series of dots where more money was always good, but more money for a poor person gives you a big increase in utility. More money for a poor person, for a rich person gives you less additional utility. Now, I don't want you to think that the curve that I drew there in that video was essentially true. This was a proposal. Now, people could have different types of subjective utility functions. So for money, people generally like money, and so the utility associated with more money goes up. You could even think about bad things which you don't like, in which case maybe they have negative utility. But in this video, I'm going to go over, just elaborate on this idea of decreasing marginal utility. So what I've done in this video is to represent your subjective utility as a function of how many cookies you have eaten. So if I have eaten 0 cookies, then I'm not very happy. I have 0 utility. If I eat 1 cookie, then my happiness goes up by quite a lot, as represented by the length of this green line. If I eat a 2nd cookie, then this might add even further to my subjective utility, but I won't gain as much subjective utility as going from no cookies to 1 cookie. But let's say things get a bit out of hand and now I have 3 cookies. What might happen here, what you might kind of realize as well from personal experience, is maybe your utility starts to go down. Maybe you're starting to feel a bit full up. Maybe you're thinking that this was a bad decision. And so now the amount of utility that you've had is essentially, that you've added is negative. And so if I were completely ridiculous and were to eat 4 cookies, then you can imagine that all the benefits that I had accrued by going from 0 cookies to 1 or even 2 has now been wiped out. Maybe I'm feeling very full up. Maybe I'm feeling that I just definitely don't want any more cookies. This was a bad decision. And so on the 4th cookie, the amount of additional utility you'd get would be negative, and it would be going down by even more. So let's think about this in terms of what we talked about in terms of marginal utility, which is simply the change in utility for every extra cookie that you eat. So if we look on this axis now, on the right hand side, I've kind of added this marginal utility axis. What we can see is that when we go from 0 to 1 cookie, we have a large increase in marginal utility. We have another cookie and we have a small but still an increase in marginal utility. But by the time we have a 3rd one, we have a decreased marginal utility even further, but now it's actually decreased from being positive to being negative. And again, by the time we have the 4th cookie, our marginal utility has reduced even further, and now it's even more negative. So this was just an example to show that the way in which your tangible reward on the x-axis relates to your subjective utility is flexible. There is no correct answer, and that's kind of one of the important points here about the notion of subjective utility.